So welcome back to another interview prep React challenge problem. This is geared towards, again, like beginners or someone who's trying to do like a interview for a junior position. But again, this is still just React practice. So if you're a beginner and you're trying to learn React, doing this and trying to solve this yourself before watching me do it is probably good practice. But what we're going to solve in this video, what we're going to implement in this video is, let's say you're asked to build a UI where a user can enter in a Sudoku puzzle. And when you enter in the Sudoku puzzle, like entering the numbers, you can click a submit button and it tells you if you got it right or if you got it wrong. Now, I'm not saying that you have to actually implement the solving portion of it, because that's way more advanced. But there is an API I found that you can run locally. So during the interview, I mean, someone would probably provide you the API and they would say, hey, like, just hit this URL. So I'm going to follow these steps real quick. I'll probably cut this out, but I'm going to go ahead and just clone this project real quick like that, and that'll download the API. And then I'm going to go ahead and CD into that API, which I believe I might already be in. I am. And then I'm going to go ahead and run this Docker build command. So what this is going to do, it's going to take all the files that are in that API folder. It's going to put them in a Docker image. This Docker image probably has like Python and a bunch of other things in it. But the idea is that it kind of simplifies your ability to run something locally. It's all containerized. We don't have to worry about installing the right version of Python or, understanding how to set up the requirements. Basically, when you build the container like we just did, you can then run it. So let's just go ahead and run this container and see what happens. So at this point, we should have a API that's running at this localhost 5000 that we can hit. And if you look at the example request that you need to send it, let's just go ahead and try to do a JSON-based post. I'm going to go ahead and take this code here, and I want to verify if I were to run this in another terminal, like so. We get back a response, and it says that, hey, the solution for this Sudoku puzzle is this, or one solution is this. All right, so the idea is the user can like start up a board with some initial data, and then they can hit this API and it's going to give them the solution and kind of fill out the board for them. So I think I changed my mind on like what the problem statement is, but it's still going to be good practice. So with all the API and Docker stuff already set up, again, like you wouldn't have to worry about this. Like if you're a junior, just don't worry about the stuff. You'd probably be given a URL that you can just use. But let's move on to the actual challenge part of how do you build out some type of form that has a bunch of inputs that you can enter in a basic example puzzle, such as this one. So before we look at React, let's just look at this. This is a grid. And hopefully in CSS, you know how to build some type of grid. There is something called display of grid, which we're going to try using that. Hopefully it'll solve the problem. And we need a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 by 9 grid for solving the Sudoku puzzle. And let's just try to render it out. So the first step is I want to draw out a 9 by 9 grid, and let's see if we can do that. Again, I had this all set up with Vite. So if I look at app.tsx, that could be the entry point. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just delete all this bare bones code. Let's just start with something fresh, so we don't have to worry about all that stuff. Okay, and now we want to display a 9 by 9 grid. So let's just go ahead and make a div. We can give it a class of, I don't know, grid. And inside that grid, we can go ahead and put some cells. Okay, so we could do this the old school way. All right, obviously, this is probably going to be a lot of work doing it that way. So it'd probably be better to have an array that we kind of loop over. So I'm going to say const grid and set grid equals use state. Anytime that you have something in React that you want to dynamically change and then have it re-rendered to the page, you probably want to use some state. All right, so we're going to set this to a array. Again, I'm using TypeScript. So if you're not really familiar with TypeScript, don't really worry about it. But this is going to be an array of numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and do number, and then that's going to store an array of numbers. So that's a 2D grid. And I'm rusty at TypeScript, so I think this is actually how you do it. So this is a 2D array of numbers. And we should probably initialize it with an empty grid. So I'm just going to go ahead and make like, I don't know, something like this. And again, there's like a lot of ways you can do this, right? There's no right or wrong solution. I'm going to go ahead and just do this the most dirty way I can think of, and it still will solve the same problem. So basically, I'm going to go ahead and just do this. So this is 3, 3, and 3. So we have an initial grid, and we want to kind of loop through it and render out some blank cells. And I believe in Sudoku, you can't you can't do zeros. It's just 1 through 9, right? So we could treat 0 as like the null state. And I'm going to go ahead and just do that. And we're going to try to also render out the grid here. So we have the grid that's in state. And in React, how do you render out a grid? Well, you can do a for loop, or sorry, you can do a map. So let's do grid.map. And we're going to go ahead and say row like this. And we need to render out a row here. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut this code out, right? Cut that out. And I'm going to render out a row. I'm going to go ahead and put grid here so the whole grid is also wrapped in that. And let's save this. Now again, this is a 2D array, so we have to do another map inside of the row. I'm going to go ahead and change this class name to a row. And inside every row, we then need to map over each row. So I'll do row.map, and that's going to be the number, I guess you could say. And we, again, need to probably just render out a cell. You can call it column if you want to be consistent, I guess. That could be call, but I'll just do cell for right now. Through doing my refactoring, I definitely messed up the code, but it's fine. We can try to figure out how to fix this. Probably just need to delete some stuff. So parenthesis, curly brace. And if this was like a real interview question, like you're gonna do mistakes like this. So just slow down and like double check that you're doing everything correctly. And let's just go ahead and render out number as well. Now we're gonna get issues because we're using React, because whenever you do a map, you're supposed to be using the key property on your things. Now in our case, we don't have like a unique identifier for the rows and the columns. So I'm just gonna go ahead and do like row index. And we can say key is equal to row index. And then also for here, I'm gonna say, I'll say column index because this is technically a column, but this is the real number. So I'm gonna go ahead and just try that. Key is equal to column index. And at this point, we've coded a lot of stuff. Let's make sure that stuff actually works. If we were to go back to the code, we get a bunch of zeros, right? So the logic I think is working, but unfortunately our styling is not up to par with making a grid. So then you can kind of, how do you make a grid? Well, we are gonna just be doing just normal classes. Typically, it's the easiest thing to do. And then we have all this additional stuff here. I'm just going to delete all this. Hopefully it doesn't mess up our app too bad. Okay, maybe I'll keep the dark mode stuff because that's kind of annoying. Okay, so let's make a grid class. So let's say .grid. And if you know anything about the display of grid, I can just go and say display grid. And then I believe it's grid template columns. And then I can say repeat 1fr 9 times. Actually, I think it might be 9. I always forget this. I think you do the number of things that you want and then the actual like value of those. So if I do that, do we get a 9 by 9 grid? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So it looks pretty good. I mean, again, like you could spend some time trying to style this. If you look at Sudoku puzzle, it looks like it just has some border around your rows and your columns and your cells and stuff. And then we could try to spend more time trying to make these more bold. But again, I personally wouldn't really care about styling too much, as long as you just show that you can think through some of these problems. So first of all, let's just go ahead and give the grid a border 1 pixel solid white. Let's see what happens there. So now we actually have a solid white border around the grid. Now for every cell, we should probably give that like some, I don't know, some initial size, or maybe the row, don't really know yet. But for every cell, we probably want to, let's just do cell, and I'll say display of grid. And then, sorry, I'm not going to say display grid. I'm going to say border 1 pixel solid white. Let's just go ahead and do that. I'm going to slow down a little bit. So this looks okay. I think there's going to be some issues with like this cell's right border is also like adding onto this cell's left border. But again, like the styling's not that important unless you're really a stickler on like getting everything perfect. But this looks pretty good. But the only issue is that like usually Sudoku is squared up properly. So I think we should probably give the cells some hard-coded width and height. Let's just try that. I'm gonna say width of 50 pixels, height of 50 pixels. And let's see what happens there. So this is not a good solution. I think the issue I'm running into is because I gave this 1fr. So this is like a responsive way to divide the grid up based on the, the width of the parent. So So instead, what we could potentially do is just give this a hard-coded width of 50 pixels, and that'll make it more grid-like. I still think this is a little too big, so I'll do 30. Am I zoomed in maybe? Oh, okay, I'm zoomed in. That's why it looks so giant. So I'll still do 30, and then this one, the width, I'll do 30. Again, there's like a ton of different ways you can style this. Someone in the comments is going to call me a noob because I'm not doing it the way they think they should be doing it. But this works, right? If you're just trying to solve a simple problem, like just do the simple solution. And then let's just get rid of the border on the grid itself. Okay, so we got a grid. Now, what is the next step? Well, you need to be able to put inputs in here. Instead of numbers, we need to put blank inputs to allow the user to type in some values. Okay, so let's go back to our React code. And instead of interpolating the number from React, we need to put an input. Technically, I could just say input, and again, we'll figure this out. Input, and we'll say value is equal to number by default. And let's go ahead and just set this one to like 3 and make sure that this will render out a 3 here. Okay, so it did, but again, the matrix is kind of transposed, so it might be kind of confusing why the 3 is rendering over here instead of up there. But the way, the looping works, you just have to keep that in mind. So I'll put it there. So that looks better. The inputs are huge, so we should probably make the inputs hard-coded as well. So I'm gonna go to the input here, and I'm gonna say inside the cell, target the input, and I'm gonna give it a width of 25 pixels. And that should make them a little smaller. They still look pretty big. I wonder why they're so large. Let's just go ahead and hover over the input here. And what width do we need to give this? Now, if you can also demonstrate that you know how to use like the dev tools, like that's a plus, because like these are like super important to understand how to use. But let's just find a nice value that would make this look good. Probably 10 looks pretty good. You can even just add in new properties here and say like height of 8 pixels. Or maybe a height of 10 pixels could also be good. That look pretty good. All right, let's just go ahead and copy and paste these styling into here, like so. And refresh the page. I like to do hard refreshes every once in a while just to make sure it's working good. So now we got a grid. Users can actually type into, well, they can't type yet, right? So we'll have to fix that. But we want to allow the users to type into these input boxes. So let's figure that out. How do you do that? Well, let's go back to the app. And there is no on-change listener on the input, right? If you have a React control component, you're going to have to add an on-change. And this on-change is going to have to update the proper location of this matrix. Now, this one might be a little bit more complex if you're a beginner, but we could probably figure it out. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is make a function here called function set grid value. And it could take in a row index, column index, and then a value. So how do we actually like update the values? One thing that's important to understand is React state is only going to re-render and draw the page if you kind of modify the references of the underlying array. So I think what we could potentially do is I could just go ahead and say const new grid is equal to ... grid. And now you can actually change new grid using mutations. I could just go ahead and say like row index and then column index is equal to value. And then I'm gonna go ahead and say set grid, new grid. We'll find out if this works. I haven't really done many 2D arrays in React, but I think because I'm spreading the grid, we get a new array object that's referencing all the old values. So hopefully it works. If not, we'll debug it live. Again, we're also getting some TypeScript errors because it doesn't like that we're using any here. So I'm gonna go ahead and just put number, and then also here in here I'll put number. Okay. So the idea is when we call this function with an I and a j, or a row and a column, and then a value, it's just going to set that, and then it's going to tell React to update the state, which will cause this whole function to re-render. And what I'm going to do is pass this in an anonymous function, and I will say row index, column index, and then I will say e.target.value. Now I forgot to put the e here. Make sure on your onChange you put the e. That's how you can access the actual value that the user typed in. Now you can also, since we only want numbers, you could say type is equal to a number here, I believe, and that'll force it to only be numbers. And I believe the thing that we get back from the onChange is going to be a string. So it's probably better to parse int that string like so. So let's see if this works. Everything is, the only issue with the numbers is that like you have this default annoying thing that pops over. So I might actually just take back what I said. I'm not going to do the number because I want it to not show that. There might be ways in CSS to like hide that or to like not have it shown up, but honestly, just do whatever works. Do the easiest thing that works. So the idea is I should be able to type into 1 here. And we got a little bug here. So it's doing NaN. When I do that, I think it's actually like, yeah, the issue is when I backspace, it's parsing int of an empty string, which makes it become not a number. So I think what we actually want to do is I think we could just default this to 0 if you were to backspace. So let's just go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this and delete that. And now I should be able to change it to like whatever I want. Okay. Cool. So I think we have like, let's just double check. I'm gonna go to my React Dev Tools over here. I'll go to my components and I'm just gonna go ahead and look at this state array and make sure as I'm typing things in like a 9 here, it types in the proper thing. Now there are some smaller bugs where like I can type 90 in here, which obviously isn't good. And we could add more error handling, and that's probably something that you should do and talk about during an interview. If this was a real interview quiz problem, like talk about the error handling, talk about edge cases, talk about like what happens if the user were to type in X. Like, does your thing work? Right now, it doesn't even allow you to type X, so I guess that's good. But I think it's not working because I'm probably just throwing an error or something. Anyway, but we'll come back. We'll try to address those edge cases if we have some time. Hopefully, this video doesn't take too long. But now what the idea is what we want to do is we want to take all the values that the user typed in and we want to put them in a format that is acceptable by this API that we just found, right? If you look through these docs, the API allows you to do a curl post request. Okay, so if you understand curl, it's just a command line tool for doing like post requests, but using fetch in the front end or Axios or whatever flavor of request library you want to use, you can do something similar. So let's just copy this example. And what we want to do is I'm going to go ahead and just make a button here. So under the grid, let me just make sure I can find out where that is. I think it's down here. I'm going to go ahead and make a button called solve. And when you click it, I'm going to say, call the function called solve. I'll just call solve puzzle. How about that? So when someone does function solve puzzle, it's going to try to do the same request, right? So I'm going to go ahead and put the curl example here so we have something to look at. But if you just kind of break this down, we could just do a fetch on this endpoint. And I believe we could pass it like a body JSON.stringify. And let's see what it takes in. It takes in a Sudoku. So I'll go ahead and put an object here that takes in a Sudoku, and that needs to be an array of, looks like characters, where instead of zeros, it puts dots. And then also like content type is application JSON. I don't know if you have to do that by default with fetch. I completely forget. I could add that just in case. I could say like content type is application/JSON. And then also I do believe you have to say method, and then I'm going to say post. Now, I don't write these fetch requests by hand. Usually I'll just find some example and I'll copy and paste it and modify as needed. But hopefully this works. If not, we will figure it out. Let's just go ahead and see what happens if we recall this. Does this actually crash? Or does this do something? And in fact, I'm going to go ahead and just hard code this string array right now into this. Right, I just want to show you the process that I like to do small incremental changes to my code base to verify that it works. In fact, as I add these features, typically if I'm using a Git repo, I'd probably commit these along the way. So like every step of the way, like this would have been a commit. Created the grid, and then styling the grid could be a separate commit. And then making the solve puzzle function could be a separate commit. So to kind of talk about that, it really shows that you know how to do small incremental commits with good documentation to your commit messages. But anyway, let's just try this out. I'm going to go to the network tab now. So kind of demonstrate your knowledge of the network tab is always good. Make sure you know how to do some of this stuff. And I'm going to go ahead and click that solve button, which should send a request via a post method to that backend, and we get a CORS error. So this is what you get when you don't try out an API before you start doing a YouTube video. It turns out that this thing does not support CORS, so that kind of sucks. We would have to basically write some type of proxy to handle that. There might be a way to do a quick like hack in the front end to disable it, and also might be a package. I'm gonna say like npm proxy CORS server. Maybe there's something we can do real quick. Now again, like I wouldn't expect you to do this on an interview. I would expect the interviewer to give you a good API that you can actually hit from the front end, but that's a whole nother story. Let's see if we can just find a quick little package. I'm just gonna run real quick and see if this will work. So I think that's 4 weekly downloads. I don't know if it's even good. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just copy this example. And I'm going to go ahead and paste it here. And instead of host being that, I will do localhost. Port is 5000. And then I'm going to say npx CORS proxy server. So let's try it out. I mean, it's always be interesting if this works or if this npm package has like a huge security vulnerability and messes up my computer. Let's just go ahead and run it and see what happens. So I'll ask you if you want to install it. I'll say yes. And now I should hopefully have a proxy server that's running on port 5000. Now I don't know. The default starts the server on the host 0009090. So it looks like I could just do whatever thing I want here. Let's just copy this example. I think what they're saying is I have to, let me not put port here. I'm gonna go ahead and just delete. I think I read the docs and I understand it better. Again, like I would not expect you to do this in a real interview. Like that's too much. But I think what I can do, if I read the docs correctly, is I can actually hit that proxy server. So 0000 at 9090, and then I could do another URL like this, which would proxy my request to that HTTP URL. It's super weird, super hacky. But let's just see if it works. That'd be interesting if this thing does work. Let's just go ahead and click solve, and it doesn't crash. We get a payload back. So we sent in a Sudoku payload like this, and we get back data message of solution. So we get back an array, or sorry, this is an object that has a data property. It has an array of one element, and it has one solution to it. Okay. So luckily we managed to get this working, but if you ran into a CORS issue, you'd probably be stuck for a long time if you don't even understand what CORS is. But again, the point is like we made the request and we're getting back some data, right? Now we can use this data and we can actually fill in all the zeros with the real data if we want to now. So let's just go ahead and try doing that. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to an asynchronous function. It's always good to talk about like, oh, you know how to do, asynchronous promises and await and stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead and say const response is equal to await a fetch, and then I'm gonna say const JSON is equal to await of response.json like this. And now at this point, I like the console log just to make sure I have the right object, but I do believe this should be the same payload here that has like the array. So I'm gonna go ahead and go to my console here, clear that, click solve, and notice how we get back that object that has data, that has an array of index 0 has a solution. So I'm going to say solution is equal to JSON data, an array of index 1 solution. So again, let's just go ahead and make sure we got the right thing. Go ahead and clear the console, click solve. And then we got that string that we're going to need to populate all of these inputs. So now like we pretty much have everything we need to solve this. All we need to do is loop through every character one by one, and also loop through every row / column, doing a 2D loop and just fill in the values, right? So let's just go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and say const new grid is equal to a new array. This is another cool thing you can do in JavaScript. I'm going to make an array that is 9 elements large. I'm going to go ahead and fill it with more arrays. So I'll say array.fill. And then I will say more, fill it with 9 columns, dot fill, and then I will put zeros in all these. Okay, now again, like console log everything along the way. Every time you add a line of code, especially for beginner, make sure it works because you don't want to spend 10 minutes solving something because you just typed something incorrectly. So it looks like we had a 2D grid. 2D grid. Awesome. Now, as we loop through it, you know how to do a 2D for loop, hopefully. I'm going to say for let I is equal to 0, I less than 9. You could also say like new grid dot length, but honestly, this is Sudoku, so technically you could use a magic number of 9 if you wanted to. Instead of I and J, I'll say like row index to keep it kind of consistent with how we did it above in a different place. So I'll loop through all the row indexes, and I will loop over the column indexes, like so. And then we're going to say new grid, row index, column index is equal to, and now we have to figure out the value. So now that I think about this, might be a more like intermediate thing, not like a junior web dev quiz. This might be a more intermediate thing because a lot of the stuff you're not going to be able to do live. You're going to be stuck. But let me make sure this is row index. Right on. So let's go ahead and try to get the value. So what we wanted to do is the solution, which I lost, is a string of a bunch of characters. And we can basically say solution.char at, but we need to get the character at the corresponding grid location. So you have to do a little bit of math to figure this out. You basically have to say row index times 9, because there's 9 columns in a row, plus the column index. And that'll give you the character at that particular spot. And we can go ahead and parse int it as well. So I'm going to say parse int, because these are all going to be strings. And then finally, I'm going to go ahead and say set grid of new grid. Now, I don't know if this is going to work. There's probably going to be some type of bug somewhere. And if there is, we will use the debugger. So let's just go ahead and type in some more random things. I'll do like a 4 here. I'll do a 2 here. I'll do a 1 here. Click solve. And notice that it definitely doesn't work. This thing is showing all the wrong values. So if you were in an interview and you're doing something live, one thing that might be worth showing is I know how to debug. So I'm going to put a debugger keyword here. I'm going to go back. I'm going to go ahead and just refresh the page. Put a 2 here and click solve, and notice that the debugger pops up. And if you can show like someone that you kind of understand how to walk through a debugger, I mean, that's like brownie points, right? A lot of people don't even know how to use the debugger. So I would think, since I've been coding for a while, I think the issue is probably with my logic here, where I do row index times 9 plus the column index. If you look at solution, it is a string. And again, like if you open up your console drawer, you can go ahead and just like print out solution. Notice that it's a string, right? So let's play around with this a little bit. Let's just go ahead and try to get solution.char at, and I will say row 2 times 9 plus 4. That gives us back 1. Do it again, plus 5. That gives us back 1, 2. So where is 1, 2 here? It's probably right here. If I did it again, we get back 6. So that's definitely where it is. 2, 1, 2, 6. So I don't think this math is wrong. I think this math is actually correct. The issue seems to be more of like maybe where we're updating the actual grid. Column index plus plus row index, column index. So let's just go ahead and do this. I'm going to go ahead and step through the debugger line by line like this. And we should get to row index is 0, column index is 0. And it should change the grid here to be 9. And then I'm going to do it again. And then it changed it to be all 7s. So the issue, what is the issue? So the issue is like looping through my grid, column by column. And it's setting every single one equal to the wrong thing. The weird part is that this should not be setting the values for these other things. Okay, I know what the issue is. So this was a dumb mistake on my part where I did the fill. Again, this is why you always, like every line you add, make sure you double check it and you do it correctly. So I don't want to fill every row with the same reference, right? I'm going to make I'm basically making 9 rows, and they all have a reference to the same array. This is not what we want. So let's just go back, and I'm going to go ahead and change this to fill it with absolutely nothing. And then I'm going to map over it like this. And honestly, I think we can just do that. I think that will no longer share a reference. So obviously, let's just go ahead and refresh the page. Let's try it again. I'm going to put like a 2 here, like this, and click solve, and let's see if that works. So I don't know if that's the right row column combination, but I mean, we can try to like run through this. I guess technically it's transposed, so it should be fine. So I'm going to refresh the page and try it again. I'm going to put like a 9 here, and I'll put a 1 here. And if I click solve, it actually changes the positions of those. And the reason it's doing that is because, remember, we are hard coding the solution that we're sending over to the backend. So if I look at the last request, notice the payload that we're sending over is just a hard coded thing of this. So we didn't go back and we didn't fix. I'm pretty sure this is working, but this part, we have it hard coded here. And let's try to figure this out. So again, we have to kind of do the inverse of this. So we're going to, again, just loop over. I'm going to go ahead and say like puzzle as string is equal to an empty string. And I'm going to loop over the exact same thing, but instead of new grid, I'm going to say grid. And then as we loop over the grid, I'm just going to go ahead and append. So I'll just go ahead and say puzzle as string plus equals this. And then also, if the thing is equal to 0, I'm just going to go ahead and say if 0, I'm going to go ahead and just make that a dot. Otherwise, I will make, now I'm going to go ahead and make this a constant here, like this, so that we don't like have too much duplicate code. Okay, do a little ternary here, and I'm going to make this a let so we can actually append these together. So let's just go ahead and put that solution in here. And again, I'm going to put a debugger because I want to make sure that this thing is working as we'd expect it to work. And let's just go ahead and try it again. So I'm going to go ahead and I'll put a 9 here. I'll click solve. We get the debugger popping up. And we can hover over puzzle as string and look at it. So we get ... 9 ... So it looks like it's doing, we need to transpose it a little bit. I think we're looping over the wrong way. I think the API would expect each row one by one. So like we have to fix the ordering in which we're passing this in, I believe. Because the 9 should have came much, much later. It should be 0, it should be .3 ... Okay, so we're going to kind of swap the ordering, which you could just simply do this, I believe. Let's just go ahead and refresh the page and solve it again. I'll put a 9 here. And I'm going to click solve and look at the puzzle, and we got it in the correct order this time. So we send that over to the backend. If I go ahead and click next, that should send that over to the backend. If I look at network, we should get back a solution for that. Now, one thing I do notice is that when you have the debugger, you won't actually get the information until you step all the way through. So let's just go back and step a little bit. Now we actually get the response. We get the solution, and again, the solution comes back row by row. So I do believe we're going to have to kind of transpose that as well. But let's just go ahead and click continue. Just go ahead and click play, and notice that I think it did mess up the ordering. So the 7, 3, it's going down by the column. So again, let's just swap the transpose a little bit, and I will say call index, and I'll say row index like this. Let's just try it again. So I'm going to go ahead and put a 9 here, click solve, and click play. And notice that the 9 and the 3 are still there. And I think this is it. This is the solution. We got it working fine. I'm going to get rid of that debugger. And yeah, I mean, I think we solved the problem. I'm going to make sure I just put some random things here and make sure this seems to work. I'll just put an 8. Make sure this seems like a valid Sudoku puzzle. I'll click solve, and it solves it for us. So assuming that this API does what we want, I think we solved the original question. Now, you could spend more time styling this. You could center the solve button. You can make a clear button. You know, let's just add a clear button just because, like, why not? Why have you if you watched the video this long? How do you clear the puzzle? I'll make a method called handle clear puzzle. And honestly, I like to do handle in front of these things. So I'm going to rename this one as well. I'll make this have a clear text. And I'm going to go up and I'm going to go ahead and show you that I'm going to go ahead and rename that to handle solve puzzle. And then also I'm going to go ahead and say handle clear puzzle. And how do you actually reset the puzzle? Well, you basically just need to set it back to some default state here, which I'm going to set this 3 back to a 0. And I'm going to go ahead and cut this out and say const initial grid is equal to this array. And I'm going to set that here. And down where we clear it, where are we clearing it? Handle clear puzzle. I'm basically going to say set grid, and then I'm going to go ahead and spread the initial grid over that. Now let's make sure this works, because I want to make sure there's no like referencing happening where like I'll change the grid here, and then when I click clear, it doesn't actually clear out, but it looks like it works just fine. Solve it, go ahead and clear it out. Okay, that's the issue I thought would happen. Okay, I clicked clear, but it kept the old state. So the issue with this is because of how like references work with arrays and React and stuff. So every time you get the initial grid, you kind of want to like just return a brand new fresh grid. So I'm going to go ahead and say const get initial grid here. And that's just going to return this array. Okay, it's a brand new array every time. And if I were to call that here, get initial grid, and then I'm going to go ahead and say get initial grid, that should fix that issue. So I'm going to go ahead and just type in a 4, click solve, click clear, and now it's wiped out. Cool. So that's all I kind of wanted to do in this video. Hopefully that was like a good beginner/intermediate React problem that you can try solving. Hopefully you guys enjoyed me getting kind of stuck. I ran into a couple of snags and we had to show you how to debug that live. Honestly, some of these debugging things are like things that I've ran into many times in the past when dealing with 2D arrays. So like I already know kind of where to look. So there wasn't really that much problem solving that went into it. But if you tried to solve this yourself, I hope you guys made some progress and it wasn't as hard as, it wasn't too difficult for you all. If it was, then that's good too. It's good to challenge yourself and make sure you're really understanding how to like solve problems like this. But we learned a lot. We learned how to do a 2D grid. We learned how to loop over it. We learned how to connect to a API and send some data and get the results back, and how to kind of decode how they're expecting certain things to be, like what formats does their API require, and then how to kind of decode the response that's sent back. Now, a little bonus thing is we set up a CORS proxy server, which is pretty annoying to have to do, but it was interesting. And then we added a clear button and a solve button, which basically, you know, wraps it all together. So if you guys like watching this, give me a thumbs up, comment, subscribe, press the bell icon. And like always, feel free to join my Discord if you want to talk to me directly or just get help if you're stuck on anything React related. Also, if you have a good idea of like more challenges like this, leave a comment and let me know. It's just something that'll take me like 30 minutes or, you know, an hour to solve for you all. That would really help you understand how to implement and problem solve better. Anyway, have a good day and happy coding.